Okay, let's dive into this. We're about to explore the messy, fascinating, and, often mistaken reality of our own origin story. It's less of a straight line and more of a detective case. One that's just full of contaminated evidence, some pretty embarrassing mistakes, and surprising twists that change everything we thought we knew.
We've all seen this image, right? It's absolutely iconic. You've got this clean, simple, straight line story of human evolution, marching steadily and confidently from a stooped ape-like ancestor right up to modern us. But what if I told you that that image isn't just a simple little oversimplification? What if it's completely fundamentally wrong? Well, it is. The real story is so much more complex, and frankly, a whole lot more interesting. It's a real puzzle. To solve this puzzle, we have to start with the evidence itself. And for a long, long time, the crucial fossil evidence we had was treated less like a sterile lab sample and more like a totally compromised crime scene. I mean, think about it like this. The contamination chain was shockingly simple. You've got these fossils being discovered, handled by dozens of people with no gloves. Then they're coated in glues and shellacs for preservation. So decades later, when our first DNA tests come along, what do you think they amplified? Often it was the DNA of the modern researchers, not the ancient hominids. The leap forward in our methods has been absolutely massive. We've gone from these kind of dusty workshops to ultra-sterile clean rooms, the kind of places they use for building computer chips. This shift is just crucial for getting reliable, trustworthy data from these incredibly precious ancient samples. But okay, even with perfectly clean data, the interpretation is a huge challenge. And this is especially true when you're not working with a full skeleton, but with tiny, isolated little fragments. So back in 1922, scientists in Nebraska were faced with this exact question. They found a single, mysterious tooth, and the race was on to figure out what or who it belonged to. And they didn't just dip their toes in the water. They went big. Based on that one single tooth, they declared a brand new species of primitive human they called Nebraska man. Artists even drew these incredible, really detailed illustrations of what this ancestor was supposed to look like, family and all. So, what's the punchline? The tooth wasn't a human ancestor at all. Nope. It belonged to an extinct type of pig. Now, science corrected the mistake pretty quickly, but it serves as this classic and pretty humbling cautionary tale about building a whole person from just one tiny piece of evidence. And this whole Nebraska man thing actually brings us to one of the biggest, most fascinating ongoing debates in all of paleoanthropology. When you find a fossil, how do you even decide if it's a new species? On one side of the ring, you've got the splitters. When they see small differences in bone structure, say a thicker brow ridge here or a slightly different jaw angle there, they tend to classify that fossil as a completely new species. They're always adding new branches to the family tree. And on the other side, you have the lumpers. They look at those exact same variations and say, whoa, hold on. They argue that this is probably just natural diversity within a single, more broadly defined species. Think of the physical differences between modern humans, or even just between males and females. So the core of the whole debate is this. Are two slightly different skulls, like the ones we call Homo habilis and Homo rudolfensis, are they really two different species, or are we just looking at the skull of a male and a female from the exact same species? It's a super critical question, right? Because if we are doing that, our human family tree could be artificially packed with all these extra names. We might be giving two different scientific names to the very same ancestor. But this whole debate has helped prove one thing for sure. That old ladder of evolution is definitely wrong. The reality is much more like a complex, messy bush, with several different human-like species living at the very same time, sometimes even interacting with each other. Okay, so we've seen that just classifying bones is hard. But what about explaining behavior? I mean, why did our ancestors start walking on two legs in the first place? This is where science has to be really, really careful to avoid what are called just-so stories. These are those neat, tidy explanations that sound great and make a lot of intuitive sense, but they aren't actually backed up by any hard evidence. For decades, the textbook answer was the savanna hypothesis. I'm sure you've heard this one. It's a simple, compelling story. Our ancestors moved out of the forests and onto the savanna, so we had to stand up to see over the tall grass to spot predators. It just makes sense, doesn't it? Well, guess what? It's been debunked.
Modern geological and fossil evidence shows that the evolutionary shift to walking upright actually happened while our ancestors were still living in a woodland environment. This new data just completely pulls the rug out from under that old hypothesis, no matter how good it sounded.
Now, with all this talk of contaminated evidence, mistaken pigs, and debunked theories, you might be tempted to wonder, do we really know anything at all about our own origins? But that would be absolutely the wrong conclusion to draw. Every single correction, every fierce debate between lumpers and splitters, every debunked idea, that's not a sign of failure. It's a sign of a healthy, functioning science that is constantly testing itself and getting closer and closer to the truth. Ultimately, the study of human origins isn't some book of unchanging facts that you memorize. It's a living, breathing process of discovery and revision, and yeah, getting it wrong on the way to getting it right. So what's the big takeaway from all this? First, our origin story is a complex bush, not a simple line. Second, that old evidence really needs a modern look before we can trust it. And finally, that the ability to admit mistakes, to argue, and to revise our thinking isn't science's weakness, it is its greatest strength. And that leaves us with one last thought to chew on. What accepted idea from today, what textbook fact that we all take for granted, will end up being the Nebraska man error of tomorrow?